This story is so raw, it leaves you unsettled, unfolding amid whiskey-soaked air and flickering lamplight. It's where a broken soul and a man who refused to look away collide by chance. It begins with a single glance, small enough to miss, but powerful enough to change two lives forever. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The saloon-devoured sound and the burn of cheap whiskey, the haze of tobacco smoke, the harsh laughter of men who had forgotten what silence meant. At the center of the room, a wagon wheel was propped upright, like a crude altar. Lashed to it was a body, a young Apache woman. Her arms were spread wide wrists, bound so tight the rope cut into skin smeared with ash and grime. Her dress hung in shreds. Her body shook with each quick, shallow breath, as if her lungs no longer trusted themselves to keep going. Cold sweat streaked through dried mud on her skin, and dark hair clung to a face drawn thin and hollow. Beside her stood the auctioneer Auric Bell, slamming his gavel against a wooden crate as though he were selling a crippled mule. $10 to start, he barked. A sharp whistle split the air. Laughter followed. Chairs scraped across the warped floor. One man called out a higher price, another spat a curse and lifted his hand. No one looked at her as human. The Apache woman forced her eyes open. They were dulled by pain, but not empty. She tried to raise her head. Her throat was raw, lips cracked, trembling. Through the noise, her voice slipped out, small, broken, barely alive. It hurts. Right there. Please. Help me. The saloon erupted in laughter. Every man joined in. Every man except Jet Hollis, standing alone at the bar. One hand crushed a glass of lukewarm whiskey. As the flickering oil lamp swept across the woman's face, Jet caught her eyes and his chest tightened. 3 years ago. An oil lamp. A small house on the open prairie. Maeve Hollis had looked at him with that same gaze. Not begging, just enduring. Jet set the glass down, and for the first time that night, certainty settled in his bones. If he turned away now, it would follow him for the rest of his life. Laughter kept slamming against the walls like blows from a hammer. Jet Hollis did not move. Inside him, something was breaking apart. Those eyes hadn't frozen him with fear. They had struck him with recognition. 3 years earlier, in a weather-beaten cabin at the edge of the prairie, Maeve had lain in bed, her breathing just as fractured. Fever refusing to loosen its grip. Medicine arriving too late. Jet had held her hand, and through the night, helpless, watching life drain away inch by inch. She hadn't cried. She hadn't screamed. She had only looked at him with that same steady gaze, the look of someone who understood pain, didn't need proof. Jet blinked, and the bite of whiskey dragged him back to the present. Auric Bell slammed the gavel again, his voice hoarse as he urged the crowd higher, faster, as if worried the merchandise might die before the sale was done. A man at a nearby table leaned toward Jet, grinning. Not bad, huh? Worth every penny. Jet didn't answer. He lowered his eyes to his hands. Hands that had dug his wife's grave. Hands that had built fences through snow and wind. Hands that had counted coins one by one, hidden away in a tin box beneath the floorboards. All for one purpose: to live out his days in quiet. No people. No trouble. No more loss. But the saloon refused to let him fade into the background. He looked back at the Apache woman. The ropes bit deeper as she shifted, sweat pooling on her brow, cutting dark trails through ash and dust. Every breath she drew whispered the same truth: time was running out. Final bid, Auric Bell shouted. A second passed, then another. In that thin stretch of silence, Jet Hollis understood his choice with brutal clarity. If he kept his mouth shut, He would walk out of the saloon with every dollar he had scraped together over the years. His ranch would remain standing. His life would keep its narrow shape. But every night afterward, when the wind rolled across the bare fields, those eyes would rise out of the darkness and stare back at him. Jet Hollis drew a slow breath and stepped away from the bar. When he spoke, his voice came out rough and dry like old timber splitting in a winter fire. "I'll bid." The entire saloon turned. For the first time that night, the laughter collapsed into silence. The moment Jet's words landed, it felt as if the air itself had been pulled from the room. Auric Bell narrowed his eyes, running them over Jet as if judging the worth of a half-starved steer. A few men cursed under their breath, irritated by the interruption. In the corner, Bram Calder wore the easy grin of a man who believed the rules bent for him. "How much?" Bram asked, his tone lazy. Jet didn't answer right away. He stepped forward until he stood beneath the wavering oil lamp, fully exposed in the center of the room. He heard the ropes creak as the Apache woman fought to stay awake. Every breath she took sounded stretched thin like a thread ready to snap. $50, Jet said. A low murmur rolled through the crowd. Someone scoffed. Another man called out a higher number, eager to show off. Auric Bell slammed the gavel again, pushing the pace. Bram lifted his hand without even turning his head. 70. The room went still. Even for traders, that was real money. Jet felt the weight of the tin box hidden beneath his floorboards press into his thoughts. Every coin he had saved. Every winter he had eaten less to keep them. He looked at the Apache woman, Suri. Her eyes had lost their focus, yet, as the noise swelled, she forced them open once more. Not to beg. Only to remind herself she was still alive. 100, Jet said. A sharp whistle cut the air. Someone cursed angry that the bidding had gone too far. Bram turned toward Jet, and for the first time, the amusement drained from his expression. "You serious?" he asked, voice edged with contempt. Jet cut him off, his tone low and firm. "She's a human being." The silence fell heavy, thick as fresh snow. Auric Bell hesitated, fingers tight around the gavel. Then he tapped it, once uneasy eyes flicking across the room. Bram shrugged and lifted his hand again. 110. Jet closed his eyes for a single breath. Then he reached into his coat, pulled free an old cloth bundle, and tossed it onto the table. Coins spilled out, clattering across the wood, the dry sound of years measured one piece at a time. "All of it," Jet said. "Every last cent." Bram stared at the pile. Then at Jet. The grin vanished. Auric Bell swallowed and brought the gavel down hard. "Sold." Jet didn't smile. He walked to the wagon wheel, slipped off his coat, and draped it over Suri's shoulders, covering the raw marks left by the ropes. As he leaned close, she looked at him again. Her eyes were dimming, but one thing remained clear. It wasn't fear. It was surprise. Jet lowered his voice so only she could hear him. "You're not a thing. I'm getting you out of here." Behind them, Bram Calder stood perfectly still. His eyes were flat hard as steel, marking every movement of the man who had just destroyed his game. The saloon doors flew open, hinges groaning, as if they resisted letting anyone leave intact. A rush of cold night air poured in sharp with dust and the sour stink of horses. Jet Hollis stepped out first, his shoulders tight. His coat was wrapped around the light, fragile body in his arms. Suri rested against his chest, her breathing so thin that Jet forced himself to slow down, afraid that one careless step might make her slip away. Behind them, the saloon fell into a dead hush. No laughter, no jeers, only eyes. Jet felt them digging into his back like iron thorns. Some burned with anger at losing their entertainment. Others simmered with resentment because he had broken rules no one ever admitted out loud. And a few he knew were already weighing the price of what he had done. He carried her toward the hitching post. The night wind rose, cutting through the street. Suri shivered. Jet pulled the coat tighter around her, yet kept his distance, as if even his warmth might cross a line. "You all right?" he asked softly. She didn't speak. She gave the faintest nod, as though even that small motion cost her what little strength she had left. Her fingers caught the edge of his coat, then quickly released it, as if afraid the gesture might be misunderstood. Jet lifted her onto the horse with care, moving slow, avoiding the hard saddle, and any place that might bring more pain. Once she was steady, he mounted in front of her reins, held low, not pressing the animal. "We're going home," he said, unsure if the words were meant for her or for himself. As they rode away, a figure stepped onto the saloon porch. Bram Calder stood there, arms folded, hat pulled low, shadowing half his face. He didn't speak. He didn't threaten. He only watched them, leave his gaze cold and measured. Like a man recording a debt. Jet didn't turn around, but he felt it. He always did. The road out of town was uneven and black with ruts. Each jolt shook her, chopping her breath into shorter, weaker pulls. Jet heard it every time, and each sound tightened something in his chest, not fear for himself, but a hard, growing truth. He had pulled a human being out of a small hell inside that saloon. And he knew well enough that the deeper hell often begins the moment someone dares to stand. The horse carried them into the open darkness of the prairie. Behind them, the lights of town dimmed, and with them faded the path back to Jet Hollis's quiet life. His ranch lay far from any traveled road. No neighbors, no church bells, only wind moving through dry grass and a windmill creaking like a clock no one bothered to hear anymore. When the horse stopped at the cabin, Suri could barely keep herself upright. Jet dismounted, tied the reins, then turned to help her down. He moved so carefully that a stranger might have taken him for awkward. In truth, he was simply trying not to cause a single ounce more pain. The first cabin belonged to him. The second, smaller, older, had stood empty since the day Maeve Hollis died. Jet opened the door of the smaller cabin, guided Suri inside, and eased her onto the narrow bed covered with a coarse wool blanket. He set a bowl of water within reach, laid a clean cloth beside it, then straightened. He said nothing more. "This is yours," Jet Hollis said. He set a small key on the table. "The door locks from the inside." She studied the key as if it were something foreign, something from a life she didn't recognize. Her gaze stayed on him, alert, even as exhaustion pulled at her eyelids. "I'll be in the other cabin," Jet added, nodding toward the door. "If you need anything, just knock." He turned away before she could respond. The door closed behind him, the lock sliding into place from the inside. In his own cabin, Jet lowered himself into a wooden chair and let out a long breath. Only then did he notice how badly his shoulders ached, drawn tight for hours. It had been a long time since he'd measured every movement so carefully, not from fear of a gun, but from fear of hurting someone else. He lay awake through the night, staring into the dark until morning crept in, before the sun climbed high. At dawn, Jet set a bowl of hot porridge outside her door. He knocked once, stepped back, and walked away. By noon, the bowl sat on the step again, empty, washed clean. No words, no glance. That afternoon, he left fresh milk. The next day, an egg. On the third day, he placed a small wooden carving beside the door, an unfinished little bird, clumsy and uneven. That was when he noticed the change. The door stood slightly open. Not enough to see inside, but enough to tell. She was watching, and she no longer locked it right away. Jet understood something years of solitude had never taught him. Some kinds of trust can't be asked for. They're earned slowly in quiet, patient days. The storm arrived on the fourth night, without warning. Wind tore across the prairie like a pack of starving wolves. Snow hammered the walls sharp as thrown gravel. Jet was mending a bridle when he heard it, a faint metallic clink. Almost nothing but enough for a man accustomed to silence. Then came a knock, uneven and weak. He was on his feet at once. Outside, snow already covered the porch. The door to the smaller cabin stood ajar. Inside, Suri had collapsed on the floor, the blanket fallen from her shoulders. Her skin burned with fever, lips tinged, blue breath shallow and hurried, as if each inhale were pulled back from somewhere far away. "It's all right," Jet said, unsure if she could hear him. "I'm here." He lifted her. She was frighteningly light, and the weight of that tightened something deep in his throat. He carried her into his cabin, laid her near the fire, fed the flames with more wood, and set water to boil. Every movement was careful, deliberate, as though one mistake might shatter her. As he replaced warm cloths, his hands shook, not from cold, but from memory. 3 years earlier, another storm, the same broken breathing. He had sat in this very place, helpless, watching the fire die, while Maeve Hollis slipped away. Back then he'd thought, if only I'd come home sooner. Now he was here. "Don't go," he whispered, as if the past could hear him. Not like she did. Suri stirred. Her lips moved. A sound escaped, not a plea, just pain with nowhere left to hide. Jet kept his distance, even as he tended her. He wiped her brow, gave her warm water in careful sips, then stepped back to mind the fire to brace against the wind. The night stretched on, without mercy, and each time the storm howled, he tensed, ready to shield her from whatever came next. Near dawn, her breathing finally eased. The fever loosened its grip, and faint color crept back into her lips. Jet Hollis let his shoulders sink for the first time in hours. He stayed there beside the dying firelight and realized something he had spent 3 years trying to outrun. Some boundaries exist only until survival demands they be crossed. And when they are crossed with care, they are not broken, they are reshaped. On the third afternoon after the storm, the sound of hoofbeats cut through the quiet. Jet was repairing the south fence when he heard them fast deliberate. He looked up to see a low cloud of dust lifting from the road that led into the ranch. Suri heard it too. She appeared in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. Her eyes no longer held panic. What Jet saw instead was readiness, the kind born of facing the worst and learning how to stand anyway. 3 riders entered the yard. Bram Calder rode in the center, dark coat tied around him, hat pulled low. The other 2 wore town badges, flanking him like a reminder of where the law had chosen to stand. Crow Bram called, his voice smooth and false. "I'm here to collect what belongs to me." He raised a folded paper, flicking it lightly through the air. All legal. Properly purchased. Jet didn't look at it. He stepped in front of Suri boots, planted firm in the dirt. The wind carried dry grass and the bite of cold iron. "She's here because I allow it," Jet said, "and because she wants to stay." One of the badge-wearing men, Marshal Reed Huxley, gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're pushing against the law, Hollis." Jet nodded once. Maybe. Behind him, Suri stepped forward. Her voice came out rough but steady. "I'll go. Please, leave him alone." Jet didn't turn, but he heard her. The choice in her words cut deeper than any threat. He drew a breath and did something he had avoided for 3 long years. He straightened. "No," he said. "You're not going anywhere." Bram's eyes narrowed. "Do you even understand what you're doing? I can take your land. I can take everything." Jet met his stare. I've already lost enough. I won't lose her too. The air went still. Wind tugged at the edge of Bram's coat. Deputy Nolan Pike glanced at Marshal Huxley, not in agreement, but uncertainty. No one wanted to be the first to draw a gun over something this tangled. At last, Bram's mouth curved into a thin smile. This time I ride away. He turned his horse. But you just bought yourself an enemy. Jet said nothing. As the riders left, the dust settled slowly back to earth. The ranch fell quiet again, but both of them knew the silence wasn't an ending. Jet turned to Suri. "Stay," he said low and certain, "even if it costs me." Suri studied him for a long moment. Then for the first time, she didn't look away. Morning came slow, as if even the prairie needed to breathe. Mist hovered over the grass. The windmill creaked in its steady rhythm, a sound Jet had once used to measure the days he spent alone. He stood outside the small cabin and waited. He didn't call out. He didn't hurry. The door opened. Near dawn, her breathing finally eased. The fever loosened its grip, and faint color crept back into her lips. Jet Hollis let his shoulders sink for the first time in hours. He stayed there beside the dying firelight and realized something he had spent 3 years trying to outrun. Some boundaries exist only until survival demands they be crossed. And when they are crossed with care, they are not broken, they are reshaped. On the third afternoon after the storm, the sound of hoofbeats cut through the quiet. Jet was repairing the south fence when he heard them fast deliberate. He looked up to see a low cloud of dust lifting from the road that led into the ranch. Suri heard it too. She appeared in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. Her eyes no longer held panic. What Jet saw instead was readiness, the kind born of facing the worst and learning how to stand anyway. 3 riders entered the yard. Bram Calder rode in the center, dark coat tight around him, hat pulled low. The other 2 wore town badges flanking him like a reminder of where the law had chosen to stand. Crow Bram called his voice smooth and false. "I'm here to collect what belongs to me." He raised a folded paper, flicking it lightly through the air. All legal, properly purchased. Jet didn't look at it. He stepped in front of Suri boots, planted firm in the dirt. The wind carried dry grass and the bite of cold iron. "She's here because I allow it," Jet said, "and because she wants to stay." One of the badge-wearing men, Marshal Reed Huxley, gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're pushing against the law, Hollis." Jet nodded once. Maybe. Behind him, Suri stepped forward. Her voice came out rough but steady. "I'll go. Please, leave him alone." Jet didn't turn, but he heard her. The choice in her words cut deeper than any threat. He drew a breath and did something he had avoided for 3 long years. He straightened. "No," he said. "You're not going anywhere." Bram's eyes narrowed. "Do you even understand what you're doing? I can take your land. I can take everything." Jet met his stare. "I've already lost enough. I won't lose her too." The air went still. Wind tugged at the edge of Bram's coat. Deputy Nolan Pike glanced at Marshal Huxley, not in agreement, but uncertainty. No one wanted to be the first to draw a gun over something this tangled. At last, Bram's mouth curved into a thin smile. "This time I ride away." He turned his horse. "But you just bought yourself an enemy." Jet said nothing. As the riders left, the dust settled slowly back to earth. The ranch fell quiet again, but both of them knew the silence wasn't an ending. Jet turned to Suri. "Stay," he said low and certain, "even if it costs me." Suri studied him for a long moment. Then for the first time, she didn't look away. Morning came slow, as if even the prairie needed to breathe. Mist hovered over the grass. The windmill creaked in its steady rhythm, a sound Jet had once used to measure the days he spent alone. He stood outside the small cabin and waited. He didn't call out. He didn't hurry. The door opened. Suri stepped into the light, moving slowly but with steadier strength than before. Her wounds were wrapped cleanly now, and for the first time, her eyes did not drop away. She stopped beside Jet Hollis, not behind him. Jet nodded toward the low hills rising to the west. "Come with me." The grave rested beneath an old pine marked only by a plain stone. No flowers. Jet knelt and laid down a bundle of freshly cut grass. Suri stood still, honoring the quiet. "She's been gone 3 years," Jet said without turning. "I lived like if I didn't look ahead. Time might pass me by, too." He reached into his coat and drew out a few small things. An old ring, a scrap of cloth he'd kept out of fear that forgetting would mean losing her again. Jet struck a match. The flame caught fast, eating the past, until only warm ash and the faint scent of smoke remained. "Not to forget," he said softly. "To let go." Suri stepped forward and placed a small stone on the grave, a sign of greeting and farewell in her way. They stood shoulder to shoulder, no touch needed. On the walk back, Jet paused at the cabin steps. He faced her, his voice low, plain, unadorned. "I can't promise peace. There'll still be talk. Someone may come back. I'm not rich. I'm not wiser than most." He met her gaze. "But I promise this you'll never be a possession here. If you stay, we build something. Slow. Real." Suri studied him for a long moment. The wind moved through her hair. Then she nodded, not in surrender, but in choice. "I will stay," she said. "With you." The ranch didn't turn into paradise. Whispers still rode the wind. The road in stayed lonely. But that night, the oil lamp burned a little brighter. 2 bowls sat side by side. A soft laugh, hesitant reel filled the cabin, and Jet understood something at last. Honor isn't winning everything. Honor is standing up, accepting the cost, and refusing to turn away. Jet Hollis was never a hero to the town. There were no cheers, no apologies. Some folks still looked aside when he rode past. Some spoke another name behind his back. And Bram Calder, somewhere beyond the horizon, was still breathing, still remembering. Yet every morning when Jet stepped onto his porch, the wind no longer sounded like emptiness. He heard the kettle begin to sing. He heard footsteps behind him, quiet, steady. A presence that demanded nothing and feared nothing. Suri had not been rescued. She had been respected. And that was what saved them both. The West was never built for perfect men. It asked only one thing: when every rule turns against you, what do you still hold? Money buys silence. Power buys obedience. Honor is bought only through choice, and its price is always loneliness, danger, and loss. Jet paid it. He lost his safety. He lost the right to remain untouched by the world. In return, he gained something rare in that hard land: the right to meet his own reflection each morning. This story doesn't claim a man must risk everything for everyone. It asks only this: when no one is watching, when walking away is easier than standing firm, will you choose to live longer or live better? The West never remembers the richest. It remembers those who refuse to sell their soul. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal /disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources voice imagery and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.